Good afternoon and welcome to our last podcast for the year, and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and thank you for all the support you've given us through the year. Let me start with this from Northman Trader. Great minds think alike. It's rather brilliant, I must admit. My article, the final article for the year, is The Decade is Drawing to a Close. Rumi pronounced that we come spinning out of nothingness, scattering stars like dust. And the Mevlana, as he was wont to do, intuited the truth. We now know that nearly half of the atoms that make up our bodies may have formed beyond the Milky Way and travelled to the solar system on intergalactic winds, driven by giant exploding stars, astronomers claim. The dramatic conclusion emerges from computer simulations that reveal how galaxies grow over eons by absorbing huge amounts of material that is blasted out of neighbouring galaxies when stars explode at the end of their lives. Science is very useful for finding our place in the universe, said Daniel Angles Alcazar, an astronomer at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. In some sense, we are extragalactic visitors or immigrants in what we think as our galaxy. Our origins are much less local than we thought, said Fouché-Gijuer. This study gives us a sense of how things around us are connected to distant objects in the sky. However, Don DeLillo brings us right back to Earth, pronouncing we're the last billionth of a second in the evolution of matter. The world has been spinning at a dizzying speed, and whilst it is only the end of the decade, it somehow feels like the fin de siècle. Changes which are actually taking place at these junctures tend to acquire extra, sometimes mystical layers of meaning. It certainly feels like a decade of semiotic arousal, when everything it seemed was a sign, a harbinger of some future radical disjuncture or cataclysmic upheaval. On one side, we have economists who opine we have never had it so good, that mankind has entered a golden age, a miraculous moment of prosperity, reducing poverty and increasing longevity. On the other side, we have a 16-year-old, Greta, Tintin, Eleonora, Ernman, Thunberg, announcing, "How dare you?" and that you've stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words. Millions of people are on the streets from Latin America to Europe, from India to just about everywhere. It feels like a very binary moment. Predicting the future is now, in fact, more complex than the computer simulations which revealed how galaxies grew over eons. Dominic Cummings, Boris Johnson's advisor, captured this best in a blog captioned "The Hollow Men." Our world is based on extremely complex, non-linear, interdependent networks, physical, mental, social. Properties emerge from feedback between vast numbers of interactions. For example, the war of ant colonies, the immune system's defenses, market prices, and abstract thoughts all emerge from the interaction of millions of individual agents interdependence, feedback, and non-linearity mean that systems are fragile and vulnerable to non-linear shocks. Big things come from small beginnings and problems cascade. They come not single spies, but in battalions. Prediction is extremely hard even for small timescales. Effective action and even loose control are very hard, and most endeavours fail. Interestingly, he concluded thus: they think they are prepared to run the country, but many cannot run their own diaries. Politics therefore suffers from a surfeit of narcissists. Therefore, the above is my long-winded caveat emptor. The best investments over the past decade have been as follows: Bitcoin plus 8,990,000%. Netflix plus 4,177%. Amazon plus 1,787%. MasterCard plus 1,126%. Apple plus 966%. Visa plus 824%. Starbucks plus 800%. Bitcoin, in fact, returned 88% in 2019. As you know, I'm a naysayer now. The level of hocus-pocus analysis around Bitcoin is now just too much, and I'm inclined to the view that Bitcoin will likely prove to be an intelligence-level operation, and probably of the Jeffrey Epstein sort. Bitcoin was last at 7,360. And of course it is the epitome of non-linearity, so I would like to be short, probably closer to $10,000, looking for an eventual capitulation to below 1,000. I remain very bullish Netflix and think its price got impaired this year by a bunch of Johnny-come-latelys. In my view, Disney will succeed, but the others will fall by the wayside. Netflix is at $329. I put out a supreme conviction buy alert on the 23rd of September at $270.75, and I'm reiterating that buy call, targeting $500 in 2020. As you are aware, the world continues to surf on a rising tide of free or nearly free money, which has lifted US stock indices to all-time highs, surged bond prices, and made sub-Saharan African sovereign bonds the best performing bonds worldwide in 2019. We're in the 9th innings of this expansion. However, Trump wants to win an election. Xi needs a truce in the trade war before the Chinese economy runs away from him and over the cliff edge. So I appreciate we're at the fag end of this party, but the punch bowl just got refilled. Enjoy it a little longer, but how much longer is the $64,000 question? And remember, the unraveling will be non-linear and exponential. 23rd of December, I said the crossfire of a trade war is now ebbing well for a few months because Trump has an election to win and Xi has an economy to rescue. And you see that more emollient tone from the Chinese side in a headline I saw from Global Times: Chicago Board of Trade agricultural futures settled higher for the trading week ended December the 27th, with soybeans closing at the highest price since the summer of 2018 on expectations for fresh Chinese purchases as a result of progress in the trade deal. Simple Trends tweeted, "My lean is the Aussie. It's giving us a clue for what is to come in China. China on breakout watch soon, and I'm bullish about the Aussie too, looking first now for 0.7050. 2019 was the 8th consecutive year with sub-average volatility. Average VIX traded at 15.4 this year after 16.6 in 2018 and 11.1 in 2017, way below the long-term average of 19.2. That's a chart from Bloomberg via Holger. That took me back to Halcyon days when her husband died in a shipwreck. Alcyone threw herself into the sea, whereupon the gods transformed them both into halcyon birds, kingfishers. She made her nest on the beach, waves threatened to destroy it. Julius restrained his winds and kept them calm during 7 days in each year so she could lay her eggs. And essentially the subpar VIXs of that kind of ilk. This is the best investments of the decade. I told you Starbucks up 800%, Salesforce 792, Nike 587, Microsoft 556%, Disney 423, Google 335, and McDonald's 325%. Let's move to home thoughts. As I said, nearly half of the atoms that make up our bodies, they are formed beyond the Milky Way and travel to the solar system and on intergalactic winds. I think that's just remarkable. I finished reading Michael Ondaatje's Warlight, and I haven't read him for a while, and really he is a luminescent writer who writes luminous prose. I saw a review of his book, and in that review it says, "We have no memories from our childhood," said Freud, "only memories that pertain to our childhood." And then he begins to work at weekends among the mostly immigrant staff whom the moth oversees at the Criterion Hotel. He falls in with the darter, a shady greyhound smuggler who meets Agnes, whose estate agent brother lets the two of them into a series of empty homes. It's really a very remarkable book. I couldn't put it down. We order our lives with barely held stories, Nathaniel says at the end of the book. In Warlight, these barely held stories knit into a work of fiction as rich, as beautiful, as melancholy as life itself, written in the visionary language of memory. He is a remarkable poetic writer. Three Canyons in Peru is one of the few places on earth where you can see the stars and the sky unpolluted by modern lights, and it's a lovely video. Tree rings and human fingerprints. Do you see a difference? We are part of nature. We are just primates. Parveen Kaswan. A ring of fire formed around the sun in a rare annular solar eclipse viewed by thousands of sky watchers in the Middle East and Asia. That's via Reuters. This is a photograph from the New York Times. The final solar eclipse of the decade produced a stunning and photogenic ring of fire around the moon. Occurred on Thursday. And then two more photographs. Hofuf, Saudi Arabia, from the New York Times. Kuwait City, Getty Images. Have a look at this short video. He picked on the wrong guy. That's from Jim Ball. It's a 30-second video clip. World's leading chefs name their favorite restaurant meals of 2019. Atomics, this is in New York. Chef Young-hoon Park serves contemporary dishes inspired by Korean cuisine at this small restaurant in Murray Hill, where tasting menus are served at a counter. It was my best meal of the year by far. Looked really good, as did this pumpkin salad from the Game and Forest menu at Noma. Rene Redzepi's pioneering restaurant divides the year with seasonal menus. But this sounded even better. Reindeer, heart, tartar, and sorrel with egg yolk, sauce, and ants. The food was really amazing. I couldn't believe how light it was, yet so faithful and tasteful. Political reflections, shamans perform New Year rituals with world leaders in Peru. The median age of a US senator is 66, which is nearly at the median age 70 of the Soviet Politburo at the peak of gerontocracy in 1982. This is a photograph of that Politburo in the snow. The leader then was Leonid Brezhnev. And in many respects, in the Western world, what we've seen is a geronto backlash, because far from there being a youthquake, which we're seeing in Africa and in other parts of the world, there you've got a kind of reverse youthquake going on. And I think that's also reverberating through the politics. He is a president with the mind of a gangster, and as long as he's in office, he will head a gangster White House. David Frum doesn't mince his words in The Atlantic. Trump's tweeting in the past 2 days was so frenzied, and the sources quoted was so bizarre, including at least 4 accounts devoted to the Pizzagate adjacent conspiracy theory QAnon, as well as one that describes former President Obama as Satan's Muslim scum. As to renewed doubts about the president's mental stability, Trump's long reticence about outright naming the presumed whistleblower suggests that he remains sufficiently tethered to reality to hear and heed a lawyer's advice. He disregarded that advice in full awareness that he was disregarding it. The usual excuse for Trump's online abusiveness, his counterpunching, amounts in this case not to a defense but to an indictment. Counterpunching literally means retaliating, and retaliation is what is forbidden by federal law. Trump's post-Christmas mania confirms House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's prediction that Trump would impeach himself. There's been a lot of skepticism about Nancy's strategy, and I must say it's been brilliant. And this is precisely what it's been. Donald Trump will not be bound by any rule, even after he has been caught. He is unrepentant and determined to break the rules again, in part by punishing those who try to enforce them. He is a president with the mind of a gangster, and as long as he is in office, he will head a gangster White House. 4th of November, I was writing about this impeachment process, and I was quoting William Golding, at the moment of vision, the I see nothing. And in fact, I think Nancy had a tremendous moment of vision. And it is in essence a non-linear thing. It's a moment of deep insight. 10 conflicts to watch in 2020. This is foreign policy. This is Rob Malley of Crisis Group. Local conflicts serve as mirrors for global trends. The ways they ignite, unfold, persist, and are resolved reflect shifts in great power relations, the intensity of their competition, and the breadth of regional actors' ambitions. It would be hard to deny that something is afoot, fin de siècle. The understandings and balance of power on which the global order had once been predicated, imperfect, unfair, and problematic as they were, are no longer operative. As a consequence, it is guilty of the cardinal sin of any great power, allowing the gap between ends and means to grow. These days, neither friend nor foe knows quite where America stands. China exhibits the patience of a nation confident in its gathering influence, but in no hurry to fully exercise it. It chooses its battles, focusing on self-identified priorities, domestic control and suppression of potential dissent, as in Hong Kong, or the mass detention of Muslims in Xinjiang, the South and East China Seas, and the brewing technological tug-of-war with the United States. Russia, in contrast, displays the impatience of a nation grateful for the power these unusual circumstances have brought, and eager to assert it before time runs out. Moscow's policy abroad is opportunistic, seeking to turn crises to its advantage, though today that is perhaps as much strategy as it needs. Portraying itself as a truer and more reliable partner than Western powers, it backs some allies with direct military support, while sending in private contractors to Libya and sub-Saharan Africa to signal its growing influence. Europe could be a counterweight, but at precisely the moment when it needs to step into the breach, it is struggling with domestic turbulence, discord among its leaders, and a singular preoccupation with terrorism and migration that often skews policy. In Libya, a crisis risks dangerous metastasis as Russia intervenes on behalf of a rebel general marching to the capital. The United States sends muddled messages. Turkey threatens to come to the government's rescue. And Europe, a stone's throw away, displays impotence. Syria, conflict not on this list, has been a microcosm of all these trends. There, the United States combined a hegemon's bombast with a bystander's pose. Local actors such as the Kurds were emboldened by US overpromising and then disappointed by US under-delivery. There's another trend that warrants attention, the phenomenon of mass protests across the globe. It is an equal opportunity discontent, shaking countries governed by both the left and the right, democracies and autocracies, rich and poor, from Latin America to Asia and Africa. Still, in almost all, the pervasive sense of economic injustice that brought people onto the streets remains. If governments new or old cannot address that, the world should expect more cities ablaze this year. He speaks about Afghanistan being number one. More people are being killed as a result of fighting in Afghanistan than in any other current conflict in the world. Yemen, he talks of a window of opportunity, reflects movement on these latter two fronts. Ethiopia, perhaps nowhere are both promise and peril for the coming year starker than Ethiopia. Abiy's liberalization and efforts to dismantle the existing order have given new energy to ethno-nationalism while weakening the central state. In a worst-case scenario, some warn the country could fracture as Yugoslavia did in the 1990s, with disastrous consequences for an already troubled region. Burkina Faso, he's speaking about risk of spillover into Ivory Coast, Ghana or Benin, Libya, Emirati drones and airplanes, hundreds of Russian private military contractors, African soldiers recruited into Haftar's forces, confront Turkish drones and military vehicles, raising the spectre of an escalating proxy battle on the Mediterranean. United States, Iran, Israel and the Persian Gulf, tensions between the US and Iran rose dangerously in 2019. The year ahead could bring their rivalry to boiling point. Trump administration's decision to withdraw from the 2015 nuclear agreement and impose mounting unilateral sanctions against Tehran has inflicted significant costs, but thus far has produced neither the diplomatic capitulation Washington seeks, nor the internal collapse for which it may hope. Tehran's shift from a policy of maximum patience to one of maximum resistance was a consequence of the US playing one of the aces in its coercive deck, ending already limited exemptions on Iran's oil sales. US and North Korea we know about. Kashmir, Modi's government seems to have no roadmap for what comes next. Venezuela's year of two governments ended without resolution. President Maduro is still in charge, having headed off a civil-military uprising in April and weathered a regional boycott and a stack of US sanctions. Ukraine, as we all know about. Here you see a fighter loyal to the Libyan government of national accord firing a machine gun. A group of soldiers from the Burkina Faso army patrolling a rural area during a joint operation with the French army. Members of the National Bolivarian Militia taking part in military exercises in Caracas, Venezuela. China, I last wrote about on the 7th of October, China turned 70. October 2015, on the occasion of Putin's intervention in Syria, I wrote an article called Putin as a Geopolitical Grandmaster. 28th of October this year, I was writing about Putin's intervention in sub-Saharan Africa, from Russia with love. Very interesting article in Bloomberg. Putin's Russia is 20 years old and stronger than ever. They start with how Putin, when he first came to power, he started with an elaborate dinner of wild boar and goose, followed by a tour of his private quarters and a jazz concert that entertained his saxophone-playing guest Bill Clinton until midnight. He's outlasted 29 Group of Seven leaders by the time he won the final 6-year term allowed by the Constitution in 2018. Appears to be turning the tables, talking about how he dominated the room when he at a recent summit on Ukraine with Angela Merkel and Macron. The Soviet Union played catch-up, he told top military brass. Today we have a situation that is unique in modern history. They're trying to catch up to us. This is his hypersonic weapon. He's deepened ties with China, annexed Crimea from Ukraine, turned the tide of the war in Syria, sold advanced air defense systems to Turkey. The dilemma for the Kremlin now is how to perpetuate Putinism or manage democracy in its own parlance after Putin's term ends in 2024. It's a small economy, less than 8% the size of the US, which spends more than double on defense alone than Russia spends on everything, including education, healthcare, and policing. That's why I say he ekes out an off-the-charts ROI on everything. Fiscally very prudent, which is a strong case for buying the Russian ruble. While the world as a whole is growing at about 3.5%, the IMF expects Russia's share of global output to almost halve to 1.7% in 2024. Here you see him walking beside Bill Clinton at the Kremlin on June 4, 2000. 5th of December 2016, I wrote about the parabolic rebound of Vladimir Putin. The military said the avant-garde is capable of flying 27 times faster than the speed of sound. It carries a nuclear weapon of up to 2 megatons. Here you see the Tupolev 160. Speaking about what Rob Malley was speaking about, this economy of anger, I said the revolutionary contingent attains its ideal form not in the place of production, but in the street. But for a moment it stops being a cog in the technical machine and itself becomes a motor, a machine of attack. In other words, a producer of speed. I've written severally that the war in Yemen is unwinnable. About Abiy, he faces a fiendishly complicated task, fending off the centripetal forces which are tearing Ethiopia apart. Burkina Faso, I wrote about the Ouagadougou signal in 2014. Gaddafi's body in a freezer, October 2011, was still dealing with the aftermath of that regime change operation. 25th of November this year, I was quoting Javad Zarif, who said if Iran wants to eat, he was quoting Pompeo, it has to obey the US, and saying that really this maximum pressure policy of Trump is the apogee of his coercive financial, currency and sanction warfare strategy. Kashmir, I've written about severally, the snowy bosom of the Himalayas, which is currently switched off from the 21st century. And I called Modi's politics of ethnocratic nationalism a bust. The economy is cratering. And I think there, as opposed to a Gerontoquake, you're seeing a youthquake. Young students are out there fighting for secular India. Priyanka Gandhi being physically stopped by the UP police while on her way to visit the family of an ex-IPS officer. To be governed is to be kept in sight, inspected, spied upon, directed, law-driven, numbered, enrolled, indoctrinated, preached at, controlled by creatures who have neither the right nor the wisdom nor the virtue to do so. Prud'homme by Pankaj Mishra. And as I said, there's certainly a fin de siècle, even apocalyptic mood afoot. Let's move on to the international markets. Currencies, euro dollar 112.04, dollar index 96.788, Japanese yen 109.15, Swiss franc 0.9723, the pound has had a good rebound of late, 131.14, the Australian dollar 0.6990, Indian rupee 71.3558, South Korean won 1156.485, Brazilian real 4.044, the Egyptian pound 1604.72, and the South African rand below 14 at 13.99. Dollar index 96.788, euro dollar, this is via Rich Economics, 112.03, pretty impressive rebound there. I came across some Citron research, and really they've been very good. They, of course, put out that short sell on Guinea, and in November they basically went bullish on Netflix, saying that Netflix is targeting $350, which is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for $500 by year end next year, and I wrote about that when it was at $270.75. And I put out a conviction buy then. Commodity markets 2019 returns. Palladium has been the top performer, up 57%. Crude up 36%. Gasoline 34%. Coffee, which was in the doldrums and then suddenly rose like a phoenix, up 30%. Lumber 27%. Brent crude 24%. Gold 18%. Silver 15%, a lot of people very bullish silver. The underperformers have been the softs, and I'm expecting them to outperform next year. Gold, that's had a very good rebound, now at 15.13.45. Crude oil, this chart is from Flying Stocksman, last at $61.68. Emerging markets, 23rd of December. I said, I'm sure you're aware, Venezuela and the likes of Zimbabwe oftentimes top the league in percentage terms, but when you convert its worth, it's tuppence in hard currency. So have a look at this chart. Venezuelan stock market is up 4,963% this year, but of course that does not even cover the hyperinflation. Go and do the calculation in dollars or euros. Looking at EM currencies, the biggest difference comparing 2019 to 2018 is that 2019 is a year of idiosyncratic EM issues, while 2018 was about broad EM stress. A good point from Robin Brooks. 2018 was the year that unsustainable current account deficits in Turkey and Argentina got shut down. In contrast, 2019 allowed large current account deficits in South Africa and Colombia to roll on. Leave aside China and India, and the remaining EM countries stopped outgrowing developed markets back in 2013. Much broader story than Argentina and Turkey, with places like Mexico and South Africa essentially at zero growth, a secular stagnation in EM, and I think that's correct as well. Argentina, Brazil, Russia, South Africa and Ukraine, there's been no growth at all. There was a terrible situation of more than 100 people killed in Mogadishu. Asymmetric warfare is bearing its fangs from Burkina to Mogadishu across this continent. This photograph from Hussein M12 got a lot of pushback, but the point is, this is the reality. Just showing smoke doesn't really inform people of how cruel and horrible this really has become. Devastating minibus full of university students were among the victims of yesterday's deadly car bombing in Mogadishu. Similar to October 2017 truck bomb, key junction target smuggled through Afgoye corridor, well-known VBIED supply route. Rashid Abdi. Kiri and Famajo have sealed their fate. Parliament, which they control, went ahead and passed a controversial election law even as news was filtering through of a major terrorist attack. What seemed fortuitous tactical opportunities, a strategic blunder. They cannot recover from this. World's longest serving ruler must reveal his assets for an IMF bailout. Equatorial Guinea's leader Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, the world's longest-serving president, should declare his assets before the nation receives more financial support, according to the IMF. Authorities will implement an asset declaration regime for senior public officials as part of the programme's requirements. It is our understanding that the law will apply to all senior government officials. As recently as 2017, Equatorial Guinea was as rich in per capita terms as its former colonial master, Spain. The government has piled up arrears with construction firms that equate to almost 19% of its GDP. IMF last week gave the green light to a $280 million loan, $40 million of which has already been dispersed. The loan roughly equates to what Obiang's oldest son and vice president, Teodoro Nguema Obiang Monge, spent between 2000 and 2011 buying luxury properties on 4 continents and assets including Michael Jackson memorabilia, documents filed in 2013 show. Less than half of the 1.3 million population has access to clean drinking water, and 20% of children die before the age of 5. Sums it up. Burundi, President Nkurunziza does what he likes doing best, praying. His football team is called the Hallelujah Football Club. Uganda may be headed for the highest ever level of campaign spending. Presidential and parliamentary candidates are likely to spend more than $655.6 million that went towards the 2016 election. Museveni unofficially kicked off his campaign. Is expected to use more than $200 million. I think it's going to be double. The rising popularity of the People Power movement amid a bulge of young people who are jobless, poor and restless, yet natives of social media, is bringing in a new dynamic and raising the stakes. The handiest weapon for incumbents to win the hearts of the electorate is money. Government dysfunction and economic meltdown, drought and a calamitous flood have plunged Zimbabwe into a hunger crisis. The people lined up early for a chance to buy subsidised maize meal from the government-run grain marketing board depot in Harare at prices they could afford. After 3 hours, a guard emerged to announce that the depot supply was rotten, so there would be none for sale that day. Life is hard, all things are expensive, there are no price controls, inflation just keeps getting worse. Benjamin, 57, a plumber, makes 700 Zimbabwe dollars a month, about $38 at official exchange rates. Less than a year ago, his salary was closer to 700 US dollars. A combination of government dysfunction and economic meltdown, droughts and a calamitous cyclone this past year have hurtled Zimbabwe towards a hunger disaster that has become the most severe in southern Africa and among the most alarming in the world. 60% of the country's 14 million people are food insecure. The money here is valueless now. Any hopes that Mugabe's former ally and successor Mnangagwa could revive Zimbabwe's economy have almost completely faded. Foreigners are reluctant to invest in Zimbabwe despite Mr. Mnangagwa's proclamation that the country is open for business. Don't make me laugh. This is not just a food crisis, it's a wider, more complicated situation. People have to make choices. Do I seek HIV treatment or food? No progressive nation can progress without its own currency, he said. We will not revert back. A hippo stuck in the mud at a drying watering hole in the Hwange National Park. 21st of January, I said, it's clear to me that Zimbabwe is at a tipping point moment. The mind game that ZANU-PF played on its citizens has evaporated in a puff of smoke, I said. Emerson Mnangagwa, who is eulogizing Mugabe as a revolutionary icon, has failed and is as untenable as his erstwhile mentor. I was saying there's a correlation between high inflation and revolutionary conditions. Zimbabwe is a classic example. I was quoting Yuval Noah Harari. He said money is accordingly a system of mutual trust. In Zimbabwe there isn't any. And not just any system of mutual trust. Money is the most universal, most efficient system of mutual trust ever devised. South African all shares up 8.9% year-to-date. Dollar rand, we're back below 14. This chart is from Mausch. Egyptian pound 1603, EGX 30 up 5.96% year to date. Nigerian all share down 15.95% year to date. Ghana Stock Exchange down 9.79% year to date. This Kenya intra-elite conflict about 2022 elections and succession should worry us all, Willie Mutunga. Kenyan history since independence records such conflicts resulting in political assassinations, murders, rapes, destruction of property, and baronial alliances that didn't give us peace. He's right. It's a Nero time, isn't it? Boom, even the final tower has fallen. Mere Thakkar. He was looking at data put out by the Communications Authority, which indicated a 4.1% fall in registered mobile money users, an 18.4% fall quarter on quarter in number of transactions, 19.3% fall in the value of transactions, number of mobile commerce transactions down 28.1%, value of mobile commerce down 16.4%, P2P transfers minus 13.7%. When I saw that, my immediate reaction was, this is a debacle. I'd previously written about the increase in tax. I said, why are you killing the goose that is laying the golden eggs? And essentially, they were dialing up the excise duty, and I was disagreeing with that and saying, when you've got a CAGR rate of 83.375%, 2010 through 2018, why not just keep encouraging that parabolic trajectory, taking the same percentage slice but a bigger slice every year? I called it kindergarten economics. However, standard newspapers then said the mobile money deals dropped because Equatorial has been excluded from the data, and Equatorial was like 20% when I looked at the data. I haven't been able to factor it back in precisely. However, even if we include Equatorial data, the growth rate has shrunk by a significant percentage compared to preceding years. Sitoyo, who runs the M-Pesa business at Safaricom, says mobile money is still growing. Exclusion of Equity Bank is significant. Gap said a huge chunk of the decline is on account of the frozen mobile betting accounts. Good point. Mere, very amateurish move from Communications Authority. Such sudden inconsistencies in data can be easily misinterpreted and cause panic. Nairobi all shares up 17.79%. Best performing market in sub-Saharan Africa. NSE 20 down 6.62% year to date. Thank you, and wishing you a super party on New Year's Eve and a fabulous 2020. And thank you for all the support you've given me. Thank you.